Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. My name is Alan, and what is your name?
My name is Gareth.
Oh, Gareth, beautiful British name. What do you do for a living, Squire?
I'm a podcast host.
You're a podcast host? What has this country come to? Is your father proud of you? He's never said so, has he? And that was my impression of Al Murray, the pub landlord, because today we are covering Time, Gentlemen, Please, in which he doesn't get much of a chance to interact with the front row of the audience. Gareth, I know that you are something of a fan of the pub landlord, and I am as well.
Yeah.
So we've come to Time, Gentlemen, Please, which is by far the least known sitcom we've done in this series, and the most modern.
I think it's worth mentioning this because we've obviously done we've done Steptoe and Son, we've done Rising Down, we've done some real classics. We wanted to bring it a bit more up to date, although I was quite surprised to find that this is nearly 20 years old. But that's still still more up to date compared to Steptoe.
That's as close as we're going to get to modern day.
I don't think even Al Murray's mum would describe this as a classic sitcom. But it is certainly an interesting historical artefact. And after all, this is the British Sitcom History Podcast. And so I think it'll be interesting to talk about this and put it into context.
And that context really is the character of the pub landlord created by Al Murray.
I guess you can tell me a little bit more about Al Murray in a second, but let me give you my history with Al Murray. I was a big fan of this character, and I'm thinking back to the 90s. He was a popular character on TV, and he used to tour live with the character, and I went to see Al Murray, the pub landlord. Oh, I don't know, 4 or 5 times I've seen him live, and as your impression implied there at the start, he did a very good stage show, very good live, very good at working the crowd. Had this interesting material which was very 1990s of, okay, we're post-alternative comedy. Now we're going to be racist and sexist, but we're going to do it ironically, and you're allowed to laugh at it. And for the time, it worked, and you sort of felt a little bit superior.
It's a bit of a fine line to tread, though, isn't it?
You felt a little bit superior because he was making all these historical allusions, and he was very obviously quite erudite and intelligent, and so it was all right to laugh at his mother-in-law jokes and laugh at the French with him. Mm-hmm. So it'll be interesting to talk about how that ironic bigotry has aged, because there was very much a trend for that. But then also, obviously, this is a sitcom history podcast, so we want to talk about how it translates into that situational context.
So I never saw Al Murray live. You were in your prime when he was touring London, I imagine, is when you lived there. I was a bit younger, but I had watched all his stand-up material that had been out on DVD or whatever. I actually went back and watched a bit of it.
Do you mean the stuff he did before the pub landlord?
Well, no, that's what I was going to say. I realised that the first DVD he put out, the first sort of recorded thing of him, is 2002, which is after Time, Gentlemen, Please, which I wasn't expecting. And there's so much material in there that is in Time, Gentlemen, Please. Obviously, he'd been doing that material for years.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So I left London in 2002. So when I say I saw him 4 or 5 times, it would have been before then. And yeah, there was lots of times watching these episodes of Time, Gentlemen, Please where I recognised the material. So I guess he'd got several years of stage show material. He would talk to the audience and mock their occupation and take the pints off the women because there's a glass of fruit-based drink for the ladies. Yeah. And it had the impression of being improvised, but clearly he had done this character for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and he'd got material there, he'd got a character really well defined, and so he was able to put that into the scripts. Well, give me a bit of background on Al Murray then. So pre-pub landlord, I know he was a comedian on the circuit. What can you tell me about him?
Well, Al Murray and Richard Herring, the other writer of the show, your classic Oxbridge toffs. They are perhaps not quite falling into the stereotypes you'd like them to, but they both went to Oxford. Al Murray went to a public boarding school when he was a child, It's kind of this slightly classic, but even by the late 80s when they were at Oxford, now out of date. Yeah. It's not Monty Python anymore, it's Steve Coogan at Manchester. And
I've heard Richard Herring talk about this, his first Edinburgh Festival. He went up there as part of the university comedy group and felt like an outsider, and tells a story of how all the alternative comedians looked down their noses at him. There was this inverted snobbery. If you compare that to, say, if it had been 10 years earlier, I think it probably was a different experience in the early 90s.
Yeah, in the late 80s. And I heard one interview, Al Murray was saying the first time he met Stuart Lee and Richard Herring, they'd just been to Edinburgh the first time in 88 probably. Yeah. And they'd just come back and they had their own little sketch group. Yeah. And they were direct from Edinburgh, so it was like, oh my God, they've been to Edinburgh, they're so cool. and that's where they first met. Other people that were knocking about around that time, Rebecca Front, who, of course, is in Time Gentlemen Please, as well as several other things that Richard Herring worked on. Armando Iannucci had just kind of come through that whole thing as well, and they worked with him. So obviously it was still a hotbed of comic talent, even though it wasn't really that cool anymore. Al Murray, he linked up with Harry Hill.
Yes.
That was kind of his first comedy connection. So he was gigging, doing stand-up, and his act back in the early 90s was sound effects.
Now, I remember this, Alan. So in the late 80s, there were a host of comedy TV shows, or the sort of alternative comedy version of variety shows, where you'd have, Adrian Edmondson and Rick Mayall throwing themselves around, and you'd have Ben Elton and people like that. Harry Enfield came through on those programs. Yeah, I kind of associate early Al Murray with that type of show. And I seem to recall he did I'm not going to try and do it, he did the sound effect of a car boot opening and closing, and he did lots of different...
That was his classic bit.
Yeah, he did lots of different like rifle noises and gun noises and things.
Yeah, I found a clip of him on The Word in 1991.
The Word. Now that's exactly the sort of show I'm referring to. Yeah.
This one's a little large, I have to keep it in the boot of my car.
Yeah, that's a typical kind of idea of what he was doing at the time. And, he managed to stretch it out to 15, 20 minutes. And so he was doing all right. But yeah, teamed up with Harry Hill. And apparently he worked on Weekending. Do you know Weekending back from the early 90s?
That's a radio show.
It was a radio sketch show, topical sketches.
Yeah, because I know that Leon Herring worked on this as well. And people could contribute. So it was like piecework. They'd get paid by the sketch, right?
They had an uncommissioned writer's room. Anyone could just turn up, throw ideas around, you write stuff. And if someone likes it, they go, okay, go and write that. You go over to the typewriter in the corner, you just bash it out, and then if it gets used, you get 20 quid or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they would go there every day, or however, whenever it was done, and do that. Leon Herring actually got put on some sort of salary for it. Mm-hmm. They were actually getting sort of paid properly, although they hated it, and eventually quit. They were doing Weekending, and Al Murray went there, and he met Harry Hill there, just as another writer. They got on, whatever. So he ended up just working with Harry Hill and being something of a sidekick to him, playing his big brother Alan.
How do balloons work? 1 minute they're small, the next minute they're big, and when you open them up, they're empty.
My big brother Alan.
I'm sure you remember Harry Hill in the 90s and Al Murray with a...
Well, Harry Hill's an interesting comedian because he kind of went mainstream and he had that ITV, Harry Hill's TV burp, which is funny, but is very broad, very mainstream. But he was very definitely part of the alternative comedy movement in the late 80s, early 90s, before he kind of went the ITV route.
I watched a few clips from the Harry Hill show, which must have been, 96, 97 maybe, something like that. And... I was specifically looking for bits with Al Murray in, but I was just watching some bits and pieces. And let me give you some advice. Don't go back and watch it. It does not... I remember it as being kind of anarchic, but hilarious. It was just total nonsense. And it was, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it's aged well. Maybe I've changed.
Well, it was, if you think about that time, it was just after Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer, Vic Reeves' Big Night Out.
Yeah.
There was definitely room for that kind of surrealism. But how long did Al Murray work with him then? When did he stop working with him when the Pub Landlord was born?
Well, the Pub Landlord was born through that work. Basically, where the Pub Landlord comes from was they were doing a show, I think this was in Edinburgh, they were doing some sort of general kind of variety show that centred around kind of Harry Hill and what he did. And so Al Murray, amongst other things, was playing the compere. He was going to be the person helping shift between one sketch to the next or whatever.
Yeah.
And he'd come up with this character to do it and it wasn't working. And so just off the cuff, he said, what about if we pretend the compere hasn't turned up? So the guy who was running the pub, the landlord, has had to step in and do it. And so he just went up and did it. Didn't have any preparation
an off the
for
cuff improvised idea turned into a character he's still doing.
Yeah.
Great.
And he says that's why the character's got no name and no like proper backstory or anything, because it was just like, I'll just do a sort of typical idiotic, overconfident pub landlord. And he sort of pretty much seems to suggest that he kind of went up there and did it, and it was like a complete thing. It was like, oh, this works, I'm going to keep doing this. And obviously it must have developed some degree since then, but that was it. The pub landlord was born, and it has basically been his career for 25 years now.
Well, I think I think that's a little unfair. I'm a fan of Al Murray. Since those early days, I do like him. He presents magazine shows on Radio 5 Live now. He's got more strings to his bow, but he is still doing the character.
Yeah, he does a lot of presenting.
He is still doing it.
Well, I just obviously I've been searching stuff on YouTube and all that, so I end up getting recommendations for things in Al Murray. And one, I didn't even watch this, but it was posted by the Tank Museum, as well as the YouTube channel, and it was top 5 tanks with Al Murray, and it was like him just walking around the Tank Museum.
Well, he's
like,
genuinely a history buff, but which is interesting. He has a history podcast actually, which I've listened to, but that definitely comes through in the character. There's a really good sketch that he does, which is crowd work, where he asks, name a country and I'll tell you how England defeated them, and he's got an answer for everything. So someone smart ass shouts Uganda, and he's like, oh yeah, Uganda used to belong to Germany, used to be a colony of Germany, we beat them in 1918, haven't heard from them since, that counts as a win, lovely. And there's real historical knowledge underneath it, and very occasionally he'll go off on this rant which is erudite and factually accurate, and you're like, oh my god, what's happening here? But he then brings it back, seen them off, lovely, and it works really well. But he wears that knowledge and he wears that learning very lightly, and he just stitches it into the character very neatly when it's needed.
And it does help to lend that knowing sense of satire, that level of irony.
Well, that's what stops it from being just bigoted.
Yeah. Because, otherwise, what is the difference between being a bigot and pretending to be a bigot?
Quite.
You've got to undercut it in some way. There's got to
be a wink, hasn't there? There's got to be a nod to camera, metaphorically, if not literally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. The Pub Landlord was officially created in 1994, I believe. And, then he started running it as a proper act. And he won the Perrier Award in 1999.
Yeah.
I think he'd been nominated a couple of times before that as well. But yeah, the Perrier Award, which I guess anyone who doesn't know, it's the award in Edinburgh, which is basically best stand-up this year. And it is quite a prestigious award that a lot of people won. I think Steve Coogan won it.
Huge names have won the Perrier.
Yeah, especially back in the day, in the 90s, 80s and 90s, the Edinburgh Fringe was a little bit less crowded, where everyone's there now, everyone and their mum's there. Yeah, he won the Perrier Award in 1999, and apparently... So in terms of the genesis of Time, Gentlemen, Please, he'd been working on, can I convert this into a sitcom and like trying to put something together. And Richard Herring was helping him in terms of being a script editor. Mm-hmm. So he was kind of looking at the material and all that. The day before he won the Perrier Award, so obviously he'd already been nominated and everything, Sky gave him a 13-episode deal. They won the Perrier Award, and then apparently immediately after they won the Perrier Award, loads of other people were like, oh, why didn't you give it to us? And he's like, I've been shopping this around for a year, so don't say you didn't have your chance.
But that's interesting, because the fact that it was on Sky was a big deal back then. You can maybe correct me here, but I think it was Sky's first sitcom. Because in 1999, Sky they had the football. You would pay for Sky if you wanted to watch the football, and they had movies as well, but they didn't really make a lot of original productions. And so Time, Gentlemen, Please was quite a big thing for them, for the company, for the production company. But unfortunately, it really meant no one saw it. So I didn't have Sky at the time because, I didn't watch the football. I was an Al Murray fan, as we have established, but I didn't see this when it went out because I just couldn't watch it.
I think I did. This is probably a good time. Let's just go into a little bit of history of digital television, because this really was the crux point where your normal kind of terrestrial channels started to get that marketplace started to get much more divided, and the framework of what we know as television really changed. Obviously, it had already started with satellite television and stuff like that, but I mean, it's digital television. So when digital television was coming in to replace analog, it just means you can have a lot more channels on the bandwidth, or whatever the phrasing should be. But there's more space there. You've got more channels. You can do more stuff. So this started officially in like 1998. They started rolling out this thing, and there was this service called On Digital, which was a subscription service. They really pushed it. They had all these channels, so you get all your normal channels for free, but then you would have Sky channels and things like that. You would pay for them, the Sky Sports and all that. And Sky Digital had also launched, so Sky Digital had their own thing, and they were doing that. all of a sudden the whole marketplace of how television works is changing. There was this period of a few years where nobody really knew what was going on, and they're just throwing money at the wall, trying to figure out what's going to happen.
Yeah.
On digital as a service, didn't do that well. It was not getting the subscribers that it needed to cover its costs. It made these huge deals to get the rights to football that were totally overinflated, and there was no chance they were ever going to make the money back. It was...
Hang on, is this, you're talking about on digital? Is this not ITV Digital? When they went bust, didn't they? Or is that separate?
It rebranded to ITV Digital a couple of years in the hope that people would go, oh, ITV, I've heard of that.
Yes.
That's fine. That was a rebranding after they were already getting a bit desperate.
Yeah.
But one of the channels that it carried that you wouldn't have if you just had normal telly was Sky One, which they kind of leased from Sky Digital. Of course, Sky Digital had it as well. And just to give you some idea of numbers, I found this. So in January 2001, which is about the time this show was going out, ITV Digital had 1 million subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 1 million boxes.
Yes.
So theoretically, 1 million houses, you know. And Sky Digital had 5.7 million.
Right.
So obviously Sky Digital were winning that race. But also, that's what, 10% of the population?
It's a small
maybe who've got
potential
access to that,
audience, much less actual audience.
And I also looked at this. The highest ever viewing figures that Sky One has had as a channel was in 2000, and it was an episode of Friends, and it had an audience of 2.86 million.
Wow.
That's the best ever. So let's bear in mind, Time Gentlemen Please was not a huge hit.
Yeah.
I mean, when you compare that to, we've talked about Steptoe getting 23 million
Sure.
viewers, it's just not the same.
The comparison is not just about numbers. When we talked about Steptoe, we talked about how it had entered the culture. Like Only Fools and Horses. Whether you watched it or not, you know those characters, you know the tropes, you recognise that three-wheeler van. Time Gentlemen Please isn't... I'm not saying it's not as good as those things. I mean, it's not. But what I'm saying is it's just not something that people would know about.
Yeah, it just passed by without anyone noticing.
Yeah, but that's maybe a sign of the times, and perhaps something that, as we review sitcoms from the last 20 years, we'll see more of.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole, like we say, the whole landscape of the industry has changed in these 20 years. But interestingly, at the time, in the early 2000s, I was a teenager. I was still living with my parents, and I had a digital box in a sort of rare occasion for me of being at a sort of technological crest of the wave. I think the reason for that was, the box itself was relatively cheap, but to get the subscription services, the actual paid channels, you had to get a card and you had to pay for that.
Yeah, they wanted you to have the box so that it could sell the football to you.
Yeah, and you could watch normal free channels, BBC One, whatever, on that box. So then you go, well, you like football, don't you? You got a card, and then you put the card in, and that card was like, these are the channels you're allowed to use. And my dad had some sort of connection where he got a dodgy card that was pirated. I got everything for free.
That is such an early 2000s grift. Everybody knew someone who had one of those. Knew someone who could get you a digital card.
Yeah, and I claim that I was young enough to not know any better. So it's my dad who's the immoral.
So you're just completely throwing dad under the bus.
Yeah, that'll do. But yeah, that was, a big part as to why ITV Digital collapsed, because there was so much piracy going on. They weren't even getting the money from people that wanted it. And
they nearly took the Football League down with them, didn't they? When ITV Digital went bust, all those Football League clubs that had been promised all this money and gone and spent it. There were several football clubs that nearly went out of business. And that's your fault, Alan.
Yeah, that's my dad's fault.
Yeah, as I say.
So at that time, I remember having all these channels. I remember watching Time Gentlemen Please at the time, and I knew enough about who Al Murray was to be aware of it. And I also remember at the time watching Baddiel Syndrome, which was a David Baddiel-led sitcom, which I don't remember much about.
I don't think I've ever seen it. I've heard of it, and I might have seen the odd clip here, but I don't remember it.
I remember it being pretty weak. But that was, what you were saying earlier, that was their first kind of attempts at making some original programming, at least sitcom-wise. Because, they were showing
They were
like
buying Friends from America.
Yeah. There was a couple of sort of sci-fi sitcoms. I think one that Rob Grant wrote, as in Rob Grant from Red Dwarf. But none of them did well. None of them were successes. And I don't know what they needed it to be for it to be a success. I don't know what their kind of target was.
They've got 6 million people watching. How many millions do you need for it to be a success?
Exactly.
It would still pass most people by, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so that is kind of a little bit of putting it in its place. But it does seem like there was a bit of an attitude at that time, like, let's create something. Here's a load of money. Just give us something. Look, this is an established character. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
And I think they were just sort of in the right place at the right time to get something off the ground. So here we are. Time, Gentlemen, Please. They got a commission for 13 episodes, which is, a bit more than you would get at the BBC, a bit more of an American-style season.
Well, this is the interesting thing because, the idea was it would be like Friends, it would be like Frasier, the other things that they were buying in from America, and they would make it a season rather than a series of 6. But they weren't prepared to throw the money at it. They weren't prepared to employ a writer's room. They basically just sat Richard Herring in a room on his own. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah, they weren't writers. It was predominantly Richard Herring wrote the scripts. Obviously, a lot of it is derived from Al Murray's stand-up material, so he's credited as a writer on all of them. And I do think they sat down and wrote together sometimes as well. Stuart Lee is credited as a script editor on the series and also is actually credited as a writer on a few episodes. I think here Richard Herring said there were 2 episodes in the first series that Stuart wrote the first draft of, did the kind of the grunt work and then sent it to him. But all the others, it's basically Richard Herring and Al Murray's character work. As
we get into the episode that we're going to discuss and others, when you say they wrote it together, let's call them Herring and Murray, there was very much a Lennon-McCartney feel to it. I was picking out Al Murray material and I was picking out Richard Herring lines, and you could hear one voice, well, literally in Al Murray's case, but you could hear the other characters. Yeah, I can hear Richard Herring saying that. And so it made for this kind of uncomfortable two things being jammed together. I'm a fan of Al Murray's material. I would go and see him again right now. But then trying to cram it into a narrative sitcom, it jarred several times.
I agree. It's basically anything the pub landlord is doing is Al Murray's material.
Yeah, and one of the other characters is interacting him just like the woman in the front row.
Yeah, exactly. And that could work. You just have to find that balance of, the pub landlord stood at the bar pontificating to all the regulars. That's kind of the character it's based on, so that's fine. Like, he can do that. But there is a bit of a line where you need to go, okay, this isn't just a guy doing stand-up material. It has to be a sitcom. For what it's worth, I think Time, Gentlemen, Please is all right. I don't like if we're going to sort of like put my general view on it.
Okay.
It's not a great sitcom. It's definitely a lot better than it kind of history remembers it as.
Right.
I think it's a good vehicle for that Al Murray material. And I think there are some really nice sitcom-y concepts that get thrown in there. There's some of the supporting characters I really like. And it definitely has some looser, sloppier moments.
Yeah.
But just as a general thing, I've heard them say, Richard Herring say specifically that they created this sitcom, the idea they wanted to do, as a reaction to what was becoming more and more popular at the time, which was kind of real comedy, reality comedy, such as The Office. Yeah. Obviously, The Office had just been a big hit right before.
Right.
So it was a deliberate response to that. Let's make like a 70s style sitcom, but put swearing in it. Like that. That was the conceit. And it has that feel. I think it does. But I don't know necessarily if that's a good thing, because just because they wanted to do it doesn't mean it was right.
Well, okay, so it's interesting. So my baggage here, as I just pontificated that I like the pub landlord character and I don't feel that he is comfortably crammed into this situation. So yeah, I don't like it as much as you just described. But if you were coming to this without that affection for the character, would it fit better into the situation? Maybe it would. Maybe my bias, because I've seen that character on stage, is that, he's out of place here. Even though he's by definition in place, he's the pub landlord. but you take my point.
Yeah, I would say this is a general point I was going to make. The episode I've picked for us to look at sort of specifically is episode 6 of series 1. And I picked that one because I thought it was the best written episode. I think just in terms of the structure it has, the way the things weave together and the handling of the characters, I think it's one of the stronger episodes. And this is something that I would say really falls apart in the second series.
Yeah.
Just to give a bit more background, the original series was commissioned for 13 episodes. And while it was being made and while it was going out, they suddenly decided they wanted 9 more.
Yeah.
Exactly why, I don't know. It's not like it was a huge success and they were, make us some more. I guess they had a gap to fill or whatever.
Yeah.
And Richard Herring had to scramble to write 9 new episodes in essentially about 9 or 10 weeks. He was just doing them week to week. We'll talk about this later when we get into Richard Herring, but, it really was very trying for him. No help from Al Murray because he's busy filming and rehearsing because he's in the show. And so he is really doing it all himself. And I think it's remarkable that when you watch those later 9 episodes, there isn't a huge drop-off in the quality. I think it is pretty consistent for that first series. But there's a few, you start to see the shortcuts. You start to see the corners being shaved off. But I think it gets away with it. in the second series, which I've heard Richard Herring saying a couple of times, I had much more time to deal with that, much more preparation. I'm happier with that series. I think it's better. I think it is far, far worse. That second series is so much sloppier. It's much looser. It loses a lot of the characters. It feels like everyone's disengaging with it. And I find that very interesting that Richard Herring thinks it's better. And I wonder if that is entirely founded on he has better memories of it because he was less stressed at the time and he was just generally in a better place, as opposed to he's watched them back and objectively thought they're better.
Well, it's impossible to be objective, isn't it, when you've written the damn thing?
Well, yeah. So that's sort of an interesting thing. And I will come into that a little bit later.
Well, yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Richard Herring in the second half of the podcast. But let's talk about the episode. So it's season 1, episode 6. Date with Density. And before we get into the episode, we always in our episodes we always talk about the theme music, and there isn't any. Why not?
There isn't any at all. There at the end of the thing. There is a little bit over the credits, like which is a tune I associate with Al Murray.
Yes,
because he plays at his live events. But I realise that I've only ever seen that after the sitcom, so I don't know if it was made for the sitcom or not.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But it is interesting. You get a title card, "Time, Gentlemen, Please." You get an exterior shot of the pub. You get a hugely amusing sign in the window of the pub, which is different every week. Then you get the episode title, and we're in. And that's all done over silence.
It is, yeah.
It's a peculiar choice.
Yeah, it is. I don't think it's necessarily a bad choice, though. It kind of sets up this mundane nature of this pub in the middle of just a crappy street. There's just traffic going by. But it doesn't really fit the tone of the show. It is the sort of opening you would get to The Office or something like this, just very downbeat. So, yeah, it is an odd choice. Was it because they didn't want to spend money on paying someone to create music? Maybe. So yeah, and as you say, there are a lot of repeated jokes or repeated setups, as in there's a sign, a handwritten cardboard sign on the window, which is usually says no foreigners or no men with long hair or women with short hair.
No Belgiums.
Yes, always spelt wrong with an apostrophe somewhere where there shouldn't be one.
There's always a joke on the blackboard next to the dartboard.
The food, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always a different sort of food thing. And that's fine. I like those little details. I think that's nice. But over and above that, so many repeated gags and perhaps not quite catchphrases, but repeated lines, which is an element of Al Murray's stand-up.
Well, no, that's interesting, Alan, because I'm going to presume that you watched the whole damn thing, right? Both series.
Yeah.
So I've watched 5 episodes in the last 2 weeks, including this one. And yes, there were repeated lines, repeated tropes, pub landlord, catchphrases, if you will. And immediately, the first time I heard those, they were familiar to me because, again, I know the character. But if you were coming to this without knowing the character, then,
This goes far beyond that. And the thing is, it never quite falls into catchphrase territory because there's no kind of build-up to it. Or maybe it's just because they're so prevalent. It's just part of the language of this world. And
give me an example.
Okay, I made a list of the ones that are in this episode. So, for example... So talking about how, his wife left him a year ago, he hasn't had sex for a year.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been a year now, nearly 12 months now. And then in the second series, it's nearly 2 years. And he's just, as he kind of shakes out his wrist. And then other little things. So, for example, Uncle Barry, who turns up in regular episodes, his catchphrase is, "You're doing fine, with 2 thumbs up in a very odd way. Phil Daniels' character... Whenever he gets food, he goes, "Tuck into that."
Every week he's been barred for doing something to Gary the dog.
That's a repeated joke, and I think that's quite a nice repeated joke because the punchline's different every time.
Yeah, okay.
It's like the sign in the window. It's fine to have a repeated joke.
So I see the distinction you're making. Yeah.
Other things. So yeah, another catchphrase for Terry. He says, "Slowly, slowly, catchy monkey," whenever he's trying to seduce a woman.
Yeah.
There's another one where the professor will make some reference to sci-fi or Doctor Who, and they all go, "Oh, grow up." That's a repeated line.
Yeah.
That's just ones that appear in this episode that I was making.
But you remember what I said earlier about you can see the Al Murray material and the Richard Herring material?
Yes.
Those repetitive in-jokes, that feels very Richard Herring to me.
Oh man, I was watching, just as part of my research and generally looking at stuff, watching a few clips from Fist of Fun and This Morning Richard Not Judy.
Yeah.
And it's watching a clip and it's like, that's a line from Time, Gentlemen, Please. I just watched an episode with that line in it.
Yeah.
Whereas like there was a sketch, this old man in Fist of Fun, and this old man goes, "I didn't fight in World War II, admittedly." But
yeah. Classic Herring.
the old man in the pub does that line.
Yeah.
There was another line where Richard Herring, who's playing a teacher character in This Morning Richard Not Judy, a pathetic teacher, and at the end of his lines in a sort of nervous way, just sort of goes, as they say, etc. In Time Gentlemen Please, Graham Fellows comes in for a couple of episodes as a character and has that odd vocal mannerism. And that's just two things from the 4 sketches that I watched. And there is so many repeated lines. And I see it in a lot of... Because I've watched and listened to loads of Richard Herring stuff. He repeats things over and over again. But I want to give him credit. It doesn't feel like, oh, I've got no new ideas, I just need to use it. It just feels like... Oh, that's a nice little... I'm going to seed that in. I'm going to connect it back to something I did 20 years ago, so I know the fans
That's
like
still
it.
funny. It's like having a golf club that you're going to use that same club again for this shot because it worked last time. And it hits the shot again. I agree with you. I know exactly what you're saying. There is definitely repetition. I have a lot of affection for Richard Herring, and I think he makes it work. That's kind of his shtick.
Yeah.
So let's go through this episode. What I think we should do is go through it chronologically, but perhaps branch off and talk about the different characters as we're introduced to them.
Well, actually, the way the episode opens is really nice because, like, the first 6 lines are 6 different characters. It's like Steve walks in, he says something to Terry, Terry responds, the old man says something, the professor chips in, Janet walks in, she says something.
Yeah.
Bit of back and forth, then the Gov comes in. And that's a lovely setup. That's just a great opener. All the characters speak. We know they're there. We're doing them. They've done their line. And then they carry on with it. Nice writing. I like that. We start with Steve's turning up the heating and the Gov isn't there. Bit of back and forth. Basically, it turns out they've come up with this plan to turn the heating up to make them all drink more.
Do you know what the plan was called? It was called Operation Make the Punters Drink More by gradually turning up the thermostat without them noticing. That's classic Richard Herring writing.
Yes, it is. It's a surprise it didn't turn it into an acronym, but apart from that, classic Richard Herring. So this is having some unintended consequences in that Janet is getting extremely horny. Because of the heat. I mean, we don't really need to explain that in any kind of real way. It's just it works on a sitcom level, that's fine. And then our second plot, which is set up pretty much immediately as well, the Gov is in a good mood because he's got a date with the bird from the till on the cash and carry.
Yeah.
Those are our 2 plot lines. And really nicely, and somewhat unusually, dare I say, they weave together and complement each other really nicely because the turning up the heat thing and the lust, Janet's lust, it's all playing alongside the Gov's lust. He just wants to break his 12-month duck. And then, if I dare just rush to the end, the metaphor of the boiler exploding and the magma build-up, it's...
Magma!
I mean, it's not subtle, is it?
It's not. No, it's not. But it works. It works.
But it works. And these things actually tie together. And then you've got this whole bit with Steve, who has run off from Janet and is hiding up the chimney, but then he ends up interacting with the Gov. And the things, not just that the 2 subplots work together kind of in alignment, they actually cross over and touch each other. And that's why I picked this one. I think it's the best written episode.
Yeah.
And not to say that the other episodes don't have that. It's just... some of them don't have it going on at all, but some of them it's just a lot looser, or it just has kind of one major plot line, especially when we get into those later episodes that he was writing in much more of a rush. It's like, okay, get me a basic plot line and I'll follow it through.
Yeah.
Having the time to kind of have different ideas and weave them together is just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but in terms of the episode specifically, it starts out a nice bit where, and this is what I think the show should be. The pub landlord, the other men, the regulars, are sort of crowded around him and they're talking about women. They're talking about Terry's advice on how to get women.
Yeah.
It's a nice little comedy bit. And then Janet pops up with, like, you don't know anything about women, you're stupid, and that conflict that works really nicely.
Well, let's talk about some of those characters then. So I suppose we could talk about Janet first. So she's the we should explain she's Australian, as Terry says, from the southern hemorrhoid.
Yes.
Which, the Australians, as Al Murray says, are genetically engineered for bar work.
It's instinct.
He's great. He's great material.
Instinct.
Yeah. But yeah, the joke in this is that she's horny. That's it, really. But they're all absolutely terrified of her.
Yeah, well, overall in the series, she comes in and she is this strong, confident, sexually domineering woman, which is obviously to the Gov is anathema. He's terrified.
The minute he touched it, it exploded all over his face. Hey, that reminds me of my last boyfriend.
What does she mean? I've absolutely no idea.
Look at you, you're all fingers and thumbs. Hey, you sound like my ideal man. What am I like?
Quite unpleasant, if you want an honest opinion.
Yeah, so the point is that they're all of these desperate men are desperate for some female affection and sex, But they're absolutely terrified of her. They would never go anywhere near Janet. But I did write down, Janet's still horny. Do you think men wrote this? So, even in 2000, I think this is a little unenlightened.
Well, that her character is generally very sexually domineering like that and is always going on about how she wants some.
Yeah, but she's always going on about how she wants some in the way that Richard Herring imagines he would like a woman to. I don't think any women talk like that to a gang of men.
I think it gets away with it because she's in the position of power there, if you know what I mean. She's kind of in control of that situation.
Oh, it doesn't feel exploitative. It just feels unrealistic.
Yeah. She's always like that, but in this episode, obviously, for the comic purposes, it's kind of really ramped up.
Yeah.
So this episode isn't a particularly good example of typical Janet, which is a character that I really like. Specifically, I think it's Julia Sawalha that makes it. Julia Sawalha just coincidentally was in a relationship with Richard Herring at the time.
Now, I know this, but were they in a relationship before the casting, or did it come about during the show?
I haven't really found really good concrete answer to that. Basically, I mean, as anyone who's a Richard Herring fan will know, in Fist of Fun, he went on about how he fancied Julia Sawalha and he had a shrine
There's
to
a
her
famous
and all this.
line where he says, "My fantasy woman would have the head of Julia Sawalha and the body of Julia Sawalha."
Yes.
And then just 8 short years later, he's going out with her.
Yeah, exactly. And so he met her at a script reading for something he'd written, which I think may have been a play. It was something that never got made, but they had a table read, and he'd sent it to her years before, obviously in the hope of meeting her. So presumably he fancies her, but he must like her as an actor as well. So he met her doing that, which was just before Time, Gentlemen, Please. That's the impression I got. And I think they started going out before that. So I guess they cast her on that basis, but obviously been trying to cast her in stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And again, there's always this vague kind of little snippets of conversation, little half kind of comments, because obviously not dishing the dirt in their interviews and things. But it does seem like the relationship he had with her over sort of 18 months or whatever was pretty much coincided with the filming of the first series of Time, Gentlemen, Please. And obviously he was under a great deal of stress at the time anyway, in terms of the writing and everything. And the tumultuous nature of the relationship apparently was not helping the situation. Julia Sawalha was described, in Al Murray's words, as a lot of work. And now he was referring to the relationship with Richard there at the time, I think, rather than as an actor. I'm not sure. Okay. Like I say, it's all kind of half comments.
That's interesting.
But yeah, definitely a lot of stress going on there. And the fact that she's not in the second series is perhaps all you need to know there.
Julia Sawalha was in Absolutely Fabulous, wasn't she?
Oh, yes. So Julia Sawalha has quite a significant sitcom legacy. Raised in the acting life, her father was an actor, and she went to a stage school and all that sort of thing. So that's why she started out quite young. Press Gang was the kind of the first hit. That's obviously where Richard Herring knew her from. Julia Sawalha is one of those people, just has worked really consistently. A lot of comedy, but can do drama as well, no problem. But as you see in Time, Gentlemen, Please, she's a comedy character. In Absolutely Fabulous, she's the straight man. She is not the comedy character.
Yeah.
She can do it all. But before that, she was in Second Thoughts. That's the sitcom with Linda Bellingham, and its sequel, Faith in the Future. She was the daughter in that.
Right, okay, I recall that, yeah.
Then she got the part of Saffron in Absolutely Fabulous. And so on, really. More after that. She's in Chicken Run. She was one of the voices. Yeah. She was like the main woman in that, wasn't she? So Time, Gentlemen, Please. It does feel a bit like she's slumming it slightly. It feels
right.
Like,
yeah.
You and Absolutely Fabulous, you're a bit better than this, but, she was going out with the writer. Maybe that helped.
I wonder if, you say slumming it. We talked earlier about how not a lot of people would have seen this, but obviously Sky had the money to throw at the Premier League. Do you think these guys would have been well paid for this?
Relatively speaking, yeah, I bet they were. I mean, and just because you're in Absolutely Fabulous and it's a hit doesn't mean you get paid a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the comparison. Millions more people would have seen her in AbFab, but maybe Sky One pays better than the BBC, regardless of the audience.
Well, certainly by the way Richard Herring tells it, this was the most financially successful period of his life, these 2 years, and he bought a house.
I've heard him say that, yeah. Richard Herring does a lot of free podcast material and whatnot, and obviously he tours. Yeah. But yeah, I've heard him say that this was the most lucrative job of his entire career.
But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't really got any concept of what you get paid for this, and as a writer even. But as an actor, maybe not Al Murray, but as an actor, you're going to get a lot less. Just mentioning actors there, the interesting thing I noted, let's say your pub regulars and then a couple of other characters that pop in and out. You've got 11 or 12 kind of regular cast here that are in most episodes.
Yeah.
Of those, you would say 3, maybe 4 of them, you would say are professional actors, as in they have had consistent work.
Huh.
And that seems unusual.
No, it's interesting you should say that, because obviously we're going to go through these, in sequence. But yeah, you're absolutely right. A couple of the main regulars haven't been in anything else.
Yeah.
We talked about Janet. Let's talk about the other member of staff, Steve, the barman.
Yeah.
He's a perfect example of this. So just tell me about... Well, firstly, we'll talk about the character, because for me, the character is an exact proxy for Richard Herring. So you talked earlier about watching Fist of Fun and This Morning with Richard Not Judy, and the dynamic that he and Stuart Lee had. So Richard Herring was this sort of young, enthusiastic puppy dog type character, and Stuart Lee was the world-weary cynical one. And Steve is that Richard Herring character. He is exactly... Yeah. It's like when Woody Allen writes, he gets too old to play Woody Allen, so he gets someone else in to do it. That's what Richard Herring's done here.
Yeah, and I've got no evidence for this whatsoever, but I can only assume Richard Herring, at least at first, was thinking, I'll play that role. Yeah. And then just realised it was going to be too much work with the writing and everything or something like that. I don't know. That's complete speculation, but he does like to act in his own stuff, so that's realistic.
So that's the character, he's a bit of a non-entity, really. He's a foil for the governor.
Yeah.
Tell me about the actor then, because this is how we got into this, because I don't know him from anything else.
Well, that's because he's not been in anything else, so... That's okay. Yeah, name of Jason Freeman. Very little information to be found about him. What I know is at some point he was a stand-up comedian.
Right. So that's where they found him.
That's obviously where they knew him. More specifically than that, in 1996, Richard Herring wrote a play that he did at the Edinburgh Fringe. He's done that a few times. It was called Punk's Not Dead, and Jason Freeman was in it. He was an actor in that. I don't know if he knew him before that, but that's the first connection I can find between the two of them. Richard Herring was also in it, and the other 3 actors who were in it were all appeared in Time, Gentlemen, Please as just like one-off episodes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Including Paul Putner, who you will know, of course, as the Curious Orange. Yeah. So he turns up in all his work. That's basically all I know about him. He's done no other acting. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of him doing stand-up anymore or anything past... There doesn't seem to be any evidence of him existing beyond sort of 2003. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you anymore.
It's interesting. I always like it when you hear about footballers from the 80s and 90s who retired and they're now, managing a branch of Nationwide in Chipping Norton or something like that. I love it when they just get completely out of the industry. So maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe he's a plumber in Chesterfield or something like that.
To be honest, it looks like he stopped acting about a third of the way through the second series, judging by what I've seen. So it does feel like he didn't want to be there in the second series, yeah.
Let's stay on the subject of actors who didn't really do much else. What about the prof, Andrew Mackay? Tell me a bit about him.
Yes, Andrew Mackay, I think, is also a comedian, more significantly a stand-up, but another one with very little presence in terms of online stuff. But he did definitely appear in a few sketches in Fist of Fun. He was in Ra Ra Rasputin, which was a musical that Richard Herring wrote in 1994, I think. He lived with Stuart Lee in the early 90s.
Oh, right, I didn't know that.
So he was obviously just a comedian on the circuit. They knew each other, and he's done a little bit of acting, but very little. Mostly playing like a mad professor.
See, I recognise him as a Leon Herring associate. Like he would pop up in their sketches.
Yeah, he's in This Morning with Richard Not Judy as a mad professor. He's got the right look for that, Yeah. So obviously here he plays the prof because he wears glasses. So he's the prof. That's the rules. The bloke in the pub wears glasses. But he's the intellectual in the pub in the academic sense. He does actually know things, but then he's also like a sci-fi nerd and that sort of thing. And so they take them.
And he's not so secretly in love with the Gov, isn't he?
Kind of. That's one of the elements of many that is just kind of a half-baked idea that never quite goes anywhere. So the running thing with him is that, he's secretly gay, so he makes lots of kind of advances to other people, albeit in a kind of secretive way, furtively, I guess. Then there's there's also the insinuation that he is a flasher, keeps getting mentioned, the railway station flasher or something like that, they call it. The obvious implication is that it's him. Also, there's a lot of implications that he murders people and that he's really like a bit of a psychopath. The other element of his character is that he's got this very overbearing mother, religious upbringing, and so she doesn't approve of him being in the pub. And she turns up a couple of times, played by Edna Dore, who's something of a sitcom classic, because she really found a second wind of her career playing old women when she was in her 80s, yeah. Actually, the Prof's a good example of something I want to bring up in general, and that is the Flanderization of characters.
Flanderization.
Yeah, does that mean anything to you?
Are you talking about The Simpsons?
Yeah, it's a common word. It's a common sort of phrase used to denote a certain type of thing that happens in shows, named after Flanders in The Simpsons, in which a character that, you know, is originally well-rounded or serves some sort of purpose becomes reduced down to their basic entities that are just the over-the-top caricature elements.
Yes.
And that happens in the show quite significantly,
Yes.
and the Prof is probably the best example of that. Whereas he goes from being the one who actually knows stuff, but he's an alcoholic, so he's sat in the pub all the time, to just all he is in the second series is reference about secretly being gay, reference about killing someone.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
And because you never really focus on him as a character, it never really matters, but he's the most concrete example of that. The old man goes through the same sort of journey. It's really more because in that second series, those ancillary characters are really underserved.
They're just drum beat, aren't they? It's just like a drum fill. So, you know, you've got the main characters providing the rhythm, and then you just go over and hit the Prof symbol and get his line, and then you move on. He's not actually adding anything to the drama.
Yeah, and I would say in the first series, that doesn't happen. And like I was just saying in this Date with Density, they're all sat around talking and they're chipping in lines and they're all involved in the conversation. I think that works a lot better. It's a lot more interesting. You've got more characters to work with. And I appreciate there's going to be the odd episode where that's not a character you really focus on and not going to do much. But that second series really just lets it loose all completely. Time, gentlemen, please. That is all we have time for this week, I'm afraid. You'll have to come back next week to hear the end of our discussion on this particular sitcom. And we will be discussing the rest of the cast, of course. We'll be going through the end of the episode. And we'll be talking all about Richard Herring. So do join us again next time. If you'd like to get in touch, then we are on social media at BritComPod. That's Instagram and Twitter. We've got a Facebook group as well, British Sitcom History Podcast. So do go and check all those out. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.